The ocean was unnaturally still. Erik tightened his grip on the ship's rail, staring into the black water. The moon's pale glow barely touched the surface, but something moved beneath the waves. Something vast. A deep, guttural tremor rumbled through the hull, shaking the bones of every man on board. The sea itself seemed to breathe. Then, from the abyss, two glowing eyes flickered open. The darkness of the depths twisted, shifting as an impossible shape began to rise. Scales the size of shields, slick and ancient, breached the surface, glistening with the rot of centuries. The water churned violently as the thing uncoiled, its enormous body stretching far beyond sight, its form winding like an endless storm. Jörmungandr had awakened. "Would you like to continue?" The ship lurched violently as the waves swelled, towering like walls of black water. The crew screamed, scrambling to hold on as the monstrous serpent rose higher. Jörmungandr's head broke through the surface, massive and ancient, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto the tiny vessel below. Its fanged maw parted, releasing a deep guttural hiss that reeked of decay and brine, a scent so foul it burned the lungs. The serpent's coils twisted around the ship, encircling it like a tightening noose. The sheer scale of the beast was beyond comprehension. Its body stretched beyond the horizon, vanishing into the dark mist. Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm churned with its awakening, lightning flashing across the endless void of sea and sky. Erik could not move. His legs were frozen, his mind unable to process the horror before him. The crew's shouts turned to wails as the ship groaned under the immense pressure of the serpent's grip. Wood splintered and the sea rushed in. Then Jörmungandr struck. The sky cracked open with a deafening roar of thunder, the heavens splitting as lightning illuminated the monstrous form of Jörmungandr. Its massive, ancient body twisted through the raging sea like a living storm, its scales glistening with the salt and darkness of the abyss. The ship was nothing more than a speck in its presence, a fragile toy caught in the clutches of a godlike horror. The crew clung desperately to whatever they could grasp as the ship pitched wildly, the towering waves crashing over the deck, swallowing men whole. Erik's fingers burned as he gripped the soaked wood of the mast, his eyes locked onto the beast. The serpent's head, larger than the ship itself, loomed above them, its golden eyes glowing with an eerie, unholy light. Its breath, thick with the stench of rotting sea creatures and ancient death, rolled across the deck like a toxic fog, sending men into choking spasms. Then came the sound, the deep, guttural rumble from the depths of Jörmungandr's throat, a vibration that resonated in Erik's very bones. It was not a roar. It was something worse. It was a voice, something ancient, something that had slumbered beneath the waves since the dawn of time. The air itself seemed to waver as the serpent's massive maw opened, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth slick with the remnants of past victims. The ship groaned under the immense pressure of the coils tightening around it. Wood splintered with explosive cracks, planks snapping like brittle bones. The men screamed, their cries lost in the howling wind and crashing waves. Erik turned, his eyes locking onto the faces of his comrades, wide with terror, mouths open in silent prayers that would never be answered. Then Jörmungandr struck. The impact was cataclysmic. The ship shattered like glass, the force of the blow sending men hurtling into the abyss. Erik was weightless for a moment, the icy embrace of the sea swallowing him whole. Darkness enveloped him, salt water filling his lungs as he tumbled through the depths. Above him, through the inky blackness, he could see flashes of lightning illuminating the shape of the serpent, its endless coils writhing like the roots of an ancient, cursed tree. His mind reeled, screaming in protest at the sheer impossibility of the thing before him. It was not just a beast, it was the end of all things, the great devourer, the harbinger of Ragnarok. His vision blurred, his limbs growing heavy. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Jörmungandr's golden eyes staring into his soul, pulling him into an eternity of nightmares. Erik's world was darkness. The sea wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud, cold and merciless. He didn't know if he was sinking or floating, only that the abyss had swallowed him whole. The echoes of the ship's destruction faded into silence, replaced by the slow, rhythmic pulsing of something vast moving in the depths. Then a flicker of light. Not from above, but from below. A deep, unnatural glow seeped through the water, growing stronger, illuminating the endless coils of Jörmungandr beneath him. The beast was everywhere. Its body spiraled through the abyss, stretching beyond sight like a prison of living walls. Erik's chest burned, his lungs pleading for air, but terror held him frozen. A shadow shifted. The glow intensified. Then, motion. Jörmungandr's head rose from the darkness beneath him, impossibly large, its golden eyes radiating an eerie, intelligent hunger. Its gaze locked onto Erik, unblinking, ancient, knowing. The serpent had not merely destroyed the ship, it had chosen him. Something tugged at his mind, a voice not of words, but of pure, raw will. It was a feeling, an understanding pressed into his very soul. He was not meant to die. Not yet. The beast had seen him, marked him. He belonged to it now. The water around him trembled as the great serpent opened its maw. Erik's body began to move, drawn toward the endless abyss of fangs and darkness. His limbs no longer obeyed him. His thoughts fragmented. He was sinking into its will, into something beyond his understanding. Just as the jaws began to close around him, the sea itself seemed to fracture. A burst of light, blinding, violent, tore through the depths. Thunder cracked through the water like the wrath of the gods themselves. Then a hand, strong, calloused, burning with divine power. It seized Erik's arm, yanking him away from the abyss. His body shot upward, torn from Jörmungandr's grasp as the serpent roared in fury, the very ocean trembling at its wrath. Breaking the surface felt like being born again. He gasped, lungs flooding with precious air. The storm still raged, but he was no longer alone. A towering figure stood in the ruined remains of a longship, lightning dancing in his grip, eyes burning with the fury of battle. Thor, the god's voice was a clap of thunder, shaking the very sky. The serpent is awake. Ragnarok has begun. The sea churned violently as Thor lifted Erik onto the shattered remains of the longship. The storm god's presence was overwhelming. His every movement crackled with raw power, lightning coiling around his muscular frame like living chains. Mjolnir, his legendary hammer, pulsed with an electric fury, eager for battle. Erik coughed, expelling seawater from his lungs, his body trembling from exhaustion and terror. He had barely survived Jörmungandr's grasp, yet now he stood at the heart of a war between gods. His mind screamed for him to run, to hide, but there was nowhere left to go. A deafening roar erupted from the depths. The ocean itself split as Jörmungandr rose higher, its gargantuan form blotting out the sky. The serpent's coils twisted through the storm, its golden eyes now blazing with something beyond hunger, rage. It had been denied its prey. It would not be denied again. Thor planted his feet firmly on the wreckage, raising Mjolnir high. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice like rolling thunder. The air grew thick with energy as lightning arcs from the hammer, illuminating the battlefield of sea and storm. The god's expression was grim, but resolute. He had faced this monster before. He knew how this battle would end. With a deafening crack, Thor hurled his hammer. Mjolnir tore through the air like a comet, a blinding streak of pure destruction. The impact struck Jörmungandr's skull with an earth-shattering boom, sending a shockwave across the ocean. The serpent shrieked, its massive body writhing in pain, the very sky trembling at its agony. But it did not fall. Instead, it lunged. The force of the serpent's attack was beyond comprehension. Its maw opened wide, revealing rows of fangs, each the size of a man. The sea beneath Erik and Thor collapsed, sucked into the vacuum of Jörmungandr's breath. The storm raged, waves crashing like mountains, as the final battle of gods and monsters began. Thor roared, charging forward to meet his destiny. Erik, powerless, could only watch as the prophecy unfolded before him, the battle that would shake the world, the clash that would decide the fate of all things. And as the serpent struck, lightning split the sky, and Ragnarok began. The clash was beyond mortal comprehension. Thunder and fire, sea and sky, destruction incarnate. Thor and Jörmungandr waged war upon the chaos of the storm, their battle shaking the very foundation of the world. The serpent struck like a tidal wave of scales and fangs, its massive coils smashing through the ocean with earth-cracking force. Thor met its attack head-on, his hammer shattering the air with every strike, bolts of divine lightning lancing through the storm-torn heavens. Erik clung desperately to the wreckage, his body tossed like a rag doll by the sheer force of the battle. He was nothing here, just a speck in the face of gods and monsters. Yet he could not look away. He was witnessing the end of all things, the prophecy unfolding in fire and blood. Jörmungandr reared back, its eyes glowing with a sickening, unnatural light. A low, guttural sound rumbled from its throat, a sound of malice, of something older than time itself. Then, without warning, it struck again. Its fanged maw lunged forward, its jaws opening wide enough to swallow mountains. Thor roared in defiance, Mjolnir spinning in his grasp. He leapt, meeting the beast in midair, and brought his hammer down with the full force of the storm. The impact was cataclysmic. The air itself shattered. The sea exploded outward in a blinding flash of light and fire. The heavens cracked open as the gods screamed. For a moment there was silence. Then the serpent's body convulsed. The golden glow in its eyes flickered, its endless coils twisting in agony. Dark, putrid blood gushed from the wound Thor had carved into its skull, staining the sea black. Jörmungandr let out a final earth-shaking hiss, its death rattle rolling through the cosmos like a funeral bell. But Thor did not celebrate. He staggered back, his breath ragged, his body trembling. The venom. Erik saw it, the dark liquid seeping through the god's veins, spreading like a shadow, a death sentence written in poison. Thor dropped to one knee, gripping his chest, his face contorted in pain. The great serpent was dead, but so was he. With the last of his strength, Thor turned his gaze toward Erik. There was something in his eyes, not fear, not regret, but acceptance. He had known this was how it would end. It had always been written. Then, with a final breath, Thor collapsed. The sky roared in mourning, the sea swallowed them whole, and the ocean trembled as the lifeless body of Thor sank beneath the waves, his mighty hammer slipping from his grasp and vanishing into the abyss. The storm above did not fade. It only grew worse, as if the world itself was howling in grief. Jörmungandr's enormous corpse still coiled through the sea, its deathly presence tainting the waters with blackened blood. The air was thick with the scent of poison and destruction. Erik floated amidst the wreckage, his body battered, his mind numb. He had survived the impossible. But as he looked around, he realized survival was a cruel joke. There was nothing left. No ship, no crew, no gods to save him. The battle of legends had ended, but the world had begun to crumble. The sky above cracked open, a blinding red light spilling through the clouds. The sun, once hidden behind the storm, glowed with an unnatural fiery hue. The seas boiled, the horizon shimmered with a distant growing inferno. Erik's breath hitched as he realized what he was seeing. Ragnarok was not just a battle, it was the end. Far in the distance, he saw shapes moving through the smoke-choked sky, winged horrors, creatures from ancient nightmares emerging from the edges of reality. On the burning shores of Midgard, massive figures marched through the flames, their eyes hollow, their weapons stained with the blood of gods and men alike. The final war had only begun. Erik tried to swim, but there was nowhere left to go. The water was turning against him, thickening like oil, pulling him downward. Jörmungandr's venom was in the sea now, seeping into the veins of the earth itself. He coughed, his vision blurring. Was this how it ended? Not in battle, but drowning in the remnants of destruction? A shadow passed over him. He turned his head weakly, his body barely responding. A massive figure stood atop a floating piece of debris, watching him with piercing and hollow eyes. It was not a man, not a god. It was something worse. A skeletal horse stood beside the figure, steam rising from its rotting flesh. The rider wore dark armor, cracked and scorched, his face obscured beneath a hood of shadows. Erik knew who this was. Everyone knew. The one who came for the dead, the harbinger of the underworld. The figure raised a hand. Erik's heart stopped. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the hand reaching toward him, fingers like iron pulling him into the abyss. The war was over. Erik's mind drifted through endless darkness, weightless, silent. He was neither in the sea nor on land. He had no breath, no body, only a fading consciousness, slipping further into the void. Time lost meaning. Was this death? Had he drowned in the poisoned sea, lost in the wake of fallen gods? Then something changed. A whisper, low, distant, but unmistakable. It slithered through the shadows like a serpent, curling around him, dragging him deeper. You do not belong to the halls of the fallen. The voice was neither kind nor cruel. It was ancient, patient, inevitable. Erik tried to move, to resist, but there was nothing to move. His limbs were gone, his form reduced to a drifting ember in the abyss. Then came the cold. A bitter, unnatural chill wrapped around him like unseen chains, pulling, dragging. A faint glow flickered through the darkness, revealing towering gates of jagged ice stretching into infinity. Beyond them, a city of shadows loomed, a vast, frozen wasteland of lost souls. Helheim! Erik was not going to Valhalla. No golden halls, no warriors' feasts, no place among the honored dead. The whisper came again, closer now, almost inside his mind. You were not chosen for battle, but you are chosen for something else. Shapes began to emerge from the fog, twisted figures, hollow-eyed and gaunt, their bodies wrapped in frost and sorrow, the dead of Helheim. They watched him, their expressions unreadable, their presence suffocating. And then she appeared. A figure stepped forward from the mist, her form half beautiful, half decayed. One side of her face was that of a living queen, pale and regal, with piercing blue eyes like a winter storm. The other was death itself, rotted flesh stretched over bone, a corpse that had never finished decomposing. Hel, ruler of the underworld. Her gaze locked onto Erik, and for the first time since falling into the abyss, he felt something stir within him. Not fear, not despair, something deeper, purpose. You do not belong to the world above anymore, she said, her voice calm, almost soothing. But you are not yet nothing. She extended her skeletal hand. The whisper returned, stronger now, vibrating through his very essence. Serve. The ice beneath him cracked. The shadows thickened. The frozen gates groaned as they began to open. And Erik knew he had not escaped death. The frozen gates of Helheim yawned open, exhaling a breath of cold so deep it burned. Erik's soul trembled as the dead moved aside, making way for him. He was no longer sinking. He was being drawn forward, as if the underworld itself had reached out and claimed him. Hel watched him with eyes that saw everything, past, present, and the fate that had now ensnared him. She was neither cruel nor merciful. She simply was, the inevitable end of all things. You are lost to the world above, she murmured, her skeletal hand still extended. But your story does not end here. Erik's mouth opened, but no sound came. Did he have a choice? Could he refuse? Could he fight against the pull of the underworld? Hel tilted her head, her half-rotted face unreadable. You were touched by Jörmungandr, she continued, a ghost of something resembling curiosity flickering across her features. The poison of the World Serpent still lingers in your soul. That makes you useful. A shift. A feeling like ice crawling into his veins, threading through his very being. Erik gasped as something changed inside him. He was no longer just a wandering soul. Something dark, something ancient was growing within him, coiling through his essence like a serpent through water. Hel's expression did not change, but there was an understanding in her gaze. You feel it, don't you? She whispered. Erik shuddered. The poison of Jörmungandr. It had not killed him. It had claimed him. Hel took a slow step closer, the dead whispering around them, watching. You were meant to die, she said. But you did not. The shadows pulsed, the underworld itself seemed to listen. So now, Erik of Midgard, you will serve death instead. She lowered her hand. The choice had never been his to make. The gates of Helheim slammed shut behind him. And Erik screamed as his body, his very soul was remade. Erik's scream was swallowed by the abyss. Ice surged through his veins, his flesh burning as if fire and frost had fused together in torment. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest. But there was no heart to steady, only the venom of Jörmungandr twisting inside him, reshaping him into something else. The dead circled around him, their hollow eyes watching in eerie silence. They had seen this before. They had witnessed countless souls broken and reshaped by Hel's will. But this was different. This was something new. Erik gasped as his hands clawed at the frozen ground. His fingers had changed, longer, sharper, his nails darkening into talons like cracked obsidian. His skin, once warm and human, was now ashen, the color of a corpse lost to the frost. His breath came in ragged gasps, forming mist even in the lifeless cold. But the worst was what he felt. Something ancient moved inside him. Not a heart, not a soul, something deeper. The lingering venom of the World Serpent had not left him. It had become him. He could feel its presence, coiling within the hollow of his being, whispering to him in a language older than the gods. Hel knelt before him, her half-rotted face impassive. Good, she murmured, reaching out to touch his forehead with a single, ice-cold fingertip. A surge of dark energy flooded through him, and his vision went white with agony. Memories not his own. Visions of Ragnarok, the clash of gods, the rise and fall of giants, and in the heart of the chaos, he saw himself, no longer a man, no longer a mortal. He was something else, standing at the edge of the battlefield, neither living nor dead, neither god nor beast. He was a harbinger, a creature of hell's making, a new nightmare to be unleashed upon the world when the time was right. Erik's body convulsed as he gasped for breath, his mouth filling with a strange cold mist. He wasn't breathing air anymore. He wasn't breathing anything. Hell's voice was soft but absolute. You belong to me now. The dead knelt. The underworld howled. And Erik opened his eyes, now black, now endless, reborn as something the world had never seen before. Erik staggered as the transformation settled into his bones. His body was no longer his own. His limbs felt stretched, unnatural, as if reshaped by something far older than death itself. His breath came slow and hollow, mist curling from his lips like the frozen whispers of the grave. He lifted his hands. The flesh was darkened, veins pulsing with something inky and unnatural. His fingers ended in claws, but they did not feel foreign. They felt right. The dead around him still knelt, their hollow eyes locked onto him in reverence. Not fear, not pity, recognition. Hell stood before him, her half-living, half-decayed face devoid of expression. Yet in her mismatched eyes there was something deeper. Satisfaction. Purpose. You feel it now, don't you? She murmured. Erik shivered, though not from the cold. The thing inside him, the lingering venom of Jörmungandr, was awake, coiling through his being like a serpent curling around prey. It was not merely a remnant. It was him. The whispers of the underworld grew louder, seeping into his skull like a tide he could not hold back. They spoke of things beyond his understanding, of realms hidden between life and death, of forgotten creatures waiting in the dark. You are no longer mortal, Hel said, stepping closer. Nor are you God. You are something new, something the world has yet to name. She extended a hand, not in welcome, but in command. Rise, Erik, rise as the first of my heralds. His body moved before his mind could object. He stood, the weight of his new form pressing upon him, yet he did not falter. The moment his feet met the ice, the entire realm shuddered. The gates of Helheim trembled. The shadows of the dead shifted. The very air thickened with the promise of something awakening. Hel watched him with quiet amusement. It would seem even death must prepare for what you will become. And then the darkness swallowed them both. Erik's vision blurred as the darkness consumed him, stretching out in all directions like an ocean with no shore. The whispers grew louder, no longer just voices, but something deeper. Memories, commands, prophecies. He was not simply Erik of Midgard anymore. That name was a dying ember in a storm. He was becoming. His body no longer felt human. His muscles tensed with unnatural power. His bones felt heavier, reinforced by something beyond flesh. The venom of Jörmungandr pulsed through him, altering what he was at the most fundamental level. His mind raced, grasping for some sense of self, but it was slipping away, devoured by the vast emptiness that now filled him. Then the void shattered. He was somewhere. A wasteland of frozen black stone stretched out beneath his feet, and above a sky of swirling gray mist churned endlessly. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Before him, Hel stood on an obsidian throne, watching with something between patience and amusement. You are adjusting well, she mused, her voice calm, yet layered with something unreadable. Erik exhaled, but no warmth left his lips. He felt like a being caught between two worlds, unbound from the laws of either. What have you done to me? He rasped, his voice darker, heavier than before. Hel tilted her head. I have not done anything. This was always within you. I merely awakened it. She gestured to the space around them, the frozen void stretching into infinity. Do you not feel it? The way the shadows move with you, the way the silence bends to your presence? Erik focused, his hands clenched into fists. Then he felt it, like an invisible pulse, like 1,000 unseen threads connecting him to something vast and waiting. He lifted one clawed hand, and the darkness responded. The mist trembled, the stone cracked, something in the shadows stirred, waiting for his command. He staggered back, gasping. No, this isn't me. I'm not. You are exactly what you were meant to be, Hel interrupted, standing from her throne. You carry the venom of the World Serpent in your soul. You are neither God nor man. You are the first of what comes next. She stepped closer, the ice cracking beneath her feet. You are not my servant, Erik. She smiled then, something cold and knowing. You are my harbinger. The shadows thickened. The dead whispered. The underworld itself shifted in anticipation. And Erik, reborn in the cold grasp of Helheim, knew that the world above had not yet seen its true reckoning. The realization struck Erik like a hammer to the skull. He was no longer just a man. He was no longer even himself. Something dark and ancient had replaced the person he once was, filling the hollow spaces inside him with power that did not belong in Midgard or even Helheim. The venom of Jörmungandr had become his blood, his breath, his very essence. The shadows around him pulsed with hunger. When he moved, they moved. When he thought, they listened. The ground beneath his feet no longer felt solid. It was as though the entire underworld trembled beneath his presence, uncertain of what he had become. Hel studied him with that same cold amusement, but now there was something else in her expression. Expectation. You feel it now, don't you? She whispered. Erik clenched his fists. The power within him surged, twisting, coiling like a great beast just beneath his skin. It was not his own. It never had been. He was something forged in poison, shaped by the will of Hel, but touched by something even greater. He met her gaze. What am I? Hel took another step forward, tilting her head. You are the first, she murmured. The first shadow to slip through the cracks before the world breaks apart, the first ripple in the tide before Ragnarok washes all away. The name sent a pulse through his veins, a deep, undeniable truth. Ragnarok, the end of all things. The death of gods, the fall of Yggdrasil, the great undoing of fate itself. He was part of it now. Erik staggered, his breath ragged. No, he whispered, I won't be your weapon. Hel smiled, a slow, knowing smile. You already are. The shadows lashed out. Erik's body jerked as something unseen wrapped around his limbs, pulling him downward, dragging him deeper into the abyss. The ground cracked apart beneath him, revealing an endless chasm of writhing darkness, its depths echoing with whispers of the forgotten, the forsaken, the damned. He fought, but it was futile. The venom inside him pulsed in time with the shadows, guiding them, strengthening them. He wasn't being dragged into the abyss. He was becoming part of it. Hel's voice was the last thing he heard before the void swallowed him whole. Do not resist, Erik. You were never meant to walk among men again. The darkness surged, and then nothing. Erik fell into the abyss, but there was no bottom, no end, only darkness stretching into infinity, swallowing him whole. The void pressed against him, into him, wrapping around his limbs like living tendrils. He struggled, but the more he fought, the more the abyss consumed him. His breath hitched, his body trembling as the shadows seeped into his bones. Then he heard it, a whisper, not in his ears, but in his mind. A voice older than the gods, deeper than the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Do you understand now? Erik gasped as something moved beneath his skin, slithering through his veins, coiling around his heart. It wasn't just the venom of Jörmungandr. It was the presence of something else, something vast, something waiting. He screamed as his body twisted, his muscles convulsing, his very form reshaping. His hands clawed, his skin blackened like the depths of Helheim's pits. His breath came in ragged gasps, thick with a mist that did not belong to the living. He saw himself in the abyss, reflected in the endless void. But it was not him. It was something else, something monstrous. His eyes, black as the void, glowing with an eerie blue light. His limbs, elongated, unnatural, inhuman. He was neither dead nor alive, neither man nor god. You are not meant to fight fate, the voice whispered. You are meant to become it. The darkness surged, and suddenly he understood. He was not falling, he was ascending. This was not his end, it was his beginning. The abyss shuddered, the shadows twisted, and Erik, no, the thing that had once been Erik, opened his glowing eyes. Somewhere above, Hel smiled. Her harbinger had risen. Erik's breath came in slow, measured gasps as he hung suspended in the abyss, no longer sinking but no longer whole. He felt the change, not just in his body, but in something deeper, something primal. The venom of Jörmungandr had not just infected him, it had remade him. His skin pulsed with something black and shifting, like liquid shadow. His bones had lengthened, twisted, reshaped into something neither human nor divine. He could feel his heartbeat, or rather, the absence of it. There was only a cold, rhythmic pulse, an echo of something vast and waiting. The whispers surrounded him now, no longer distant but inside him, threading through his thoughts like a tangled web of prophecy and doom. He understood them now. You are the first tide, the storm before the flood, the serpent's will made flesh. He clenched his claws and the abyss trembled. It obeyed him. He exhaled, and the mist that escaped his lips coiled like living smoke, tendrils of darkness slithering through the void. Then he felt something, a pull, a thread yanking him back toward the world of the living. Above, a crack split through the nothingness, jagged and pulsating like a wound in the fabric of existence itself. Through it, he saw the land of Midgard, a world untouched by what was coming, a world that had not yet seen the storm, and he knew he was being sent back. But not as Erik, not as the man he had been, as something new, as something worse. The shadows twisted around him, and with a final surge, they pulled him through. The last thing he heard before the abyss shattered behind him was Hell's voice, soft and satisfied. Go now, harbinger. The world must learn to fear what slumbers beneath the waves. And then he woke. Erik's eyes snapped open, and the world around him breathed. The air was thick, humid, tinged with the scent of salt and decay. He was no longer in Helheim, no longer in the abyss. He was back. But the world did not look the same. He stood on the shore of a vast, endless sea. The sky above him churned with black clouds, shifting unnaturally as if the heavens themselves recoiled from his presence. The water was not water at all, but something darker, thicker, alive. It pulsed like a massive, slumbering beast, stretching to the horizon, its surface disturbed only by the slow, coiling movements of something beneath. The moment Erik inhaled, he knew. He was no longer just himself. The venom had remade him. The abyss had claimed him. The whispers had reshaped him into something that did not belong in Midgard, nor in Helheim. He was something between, something worse. He took a step forward, his claws sinking into the wet sand, and the earth beneath him trembled. He felt the weight of his new form, his elongated limbs, his sharpened spine, the inhuman strength that coursed through him like a tide that could not be turned back. He looked down at his reflection in the water and froze. His face, his humanity, was gone. What stared back at him was something monstrous, something ancient. His skin was no longer flesh, but black and scaled, a twisting mass of dark sinew and shifting shadow. His eyes, no longer mortal, glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, like the deep, unseen places of the ocean where no sun had ever reached. The whisper of the abyss had become something else now. Not words, a command. Awaken it. Erik's claws clenched and the sea trembled. The water split as if something beneath was stirring, something vast, something waiting. The sky darkened further. The winds howled, and beneath the surface, something moved. The first ripple of what was coming. The first sign that Jörmungandr's will had returned. The harbinger had awakened, and the world was not ready. The sea churned violently, waves rising unnaturally high, as if the very ocean itself recoiled from what was stirring beneath. Erik, no, the thing he had become, stood motionless, his glowing eyes locked onto the shifting darkness below the surface. The air crackled with unseen energy, the earth trembled beneath his feet. Then the silence shattered. From the depths of the blackened sea, a shape began to rise. A massive, coiling form, endless and unstoppable, its scales glistening with venom and shadow. Jörmungandr the World Serpent was awakening, not as a distant, sleeping beast, but as something present, something here. The sea split apart as its colossal body surfaced, its very presence warping reality, bending the sky, distorting time itself. Erik felt the connection. It was not merely the serpent's return, it was his return. He was its will made flesh, its harbinger, its voice in the waking world. A low, bone-rattling hiss echoed through the heavens, deeper than thunder, heavier than fate itself. The gods would feel it. The world would know. Erik closed his eyes for the last time as a man, and when he opened them again, he was something else entirely. The first storm of Ragnarok had begun.